Hey guys, this is a video on how to apply thermal paste and some of the aspects thereof. So hopefully this will be helpful. There has been a lot of people requesting this, so I decided to make one, and the cat's gonna supervise to make sure everything goes smoothly. So yeah, he just said hi there. Anyways, let's focus on this. Now, when you have a console that uses thermal paste, or a computer for that matter, typically you'll have what's called, or what I like to call, the motherboard sandwich. You'll basically have like a top heatsink, a bottom, and then you have the cross beam here, and you have the motherboard sandwiched in between. Now, in order to separate these, you would have to first remove these. I've just taken out the screws already, so just lift those out. And because the CPU, the GPU, and all of that should already have some thermal paste on it, these layers are going to be, kind of stuck together. So when you take it apart, you have to be very careful. Basically, don't try to force it apart with too much force. You want to try to separate the two halves with just enough force. You don't want to damage anything. But once you do, you can lift these pieces off, and you will then have these sections here. Now, as you can see, I've already cleaned these, but it's just to make life a little easier. But basically, the way it would be is you would have old thermal paste here, and it's very important to note that if you ever take it apart, you open it up and you actually separate the thermal paste from the CPU and the heatsink, what's going to happen is that seal is now broken. The thermal paste will get cracked, it'll be uneven, and as soon as you open it up, you have to apply new thermal paste. And there's a couple of different ways of doing that. And I'm going to go through both of them today, just to show you kind of like the pros and the cons. Another thing that you also will see is, right here, you have that little mat. Now this is a thermal mat, basically goes over here. So there are some units that will have these little mats instead of the thermal paste, but the application is the same. It basically disperses heat and cools down your system, so it prevents overheating. So, but today, as I said, it's thermal paste that we're going to focus on. One that I would recommend is this one right here. This is the Arctic MX4. And for convenience, it also shows you right here how much is left. So I'm about halfway through, but it's fairly easy to apply, and it has a good heat quotient, and it's fairly cheap. So this is a good middle of the road. There are a lot better ones, but there's also a lot worse ones. So what you do with this is you basically just apply an amount to both of these and spread it out. But instead of doing it to these, I am going to use these. These are acrylic CPUs, basically, that I just cut out. Now it's really crappy cut out because I had to use scissors, so they're kind of broken on the sides, but it'll still get the message across. And I'm going to apply it here, sandwich these two halves, show you two different ways of doing it, and we can compare you know, the spread of the paste to make sure that we are getting an optimal spread and coverage. It should also be noted that there is such a thing as too little thermal paste, because that's one of the hot debated topics, is how much should you put on, how big should the layer be, how much coverage should you have. Basically, you want to cover the entire thing, and there is such a thing as too little, but there really isn't such a thing as too much. That being said, obviously if you put a gallon of thermal paste between this and you sandwich it, it's going to squeeze out all the sides. So that being said, you really don't want to have, you know, so much that it leaks everywhere. But even if it does, that is not a big issue, unless you have, there are some thermal paste that actually conduct electricity, and that would be bad, because basically you have electricity running all over this place here. So let's say it leaks out on this side, and it leaks out over here. Now if it conducts electricity, that electricity is going to carry over. You are going to get a short and, you know, potentially ruin your system. So this is not, you know, electrically conductive, which is another reason I like it. But that's something to keep in mind. You know, there are certain applications where you need it to be electrically conductive, but try to avoid it. Especially for these, you know, like video game consoles and so on. So yeah, basically try to get as much coverage as possible and get an even spread. One thing I should mention as well is to remove old thermal paste from your console. You just use the good old isopropyl alcohol. That'll take it off, and just clean it up as nicely as you can. Now let's focus on the actual application here, so I'll reset the camera. Okay, so I have my muck-up CPUs laid out in front of me here with the thermal paste. Now, when you buy the Arctic MX4, it does come with a little spreader like this, which, I mean, it works. You can definitely use it. I've used it a lot of times. But basically, the larger the spatula is, the easier it is to spread it across. So, you know, if you've ever bought like one of these like wall kit repairs for like drywall, it comes with one of these, which is pretty much the size of the you know, CPU. So you just drag it across a couple of times and you'll be good. Another option is if you like receiving spam email or spam mails like this crap, then typically they will have one of these inside of them, you know, and that'll work as well. So, you know, there's a lot of different ways of doing this, basically, is the gist of it. So let's focus on this. So what you want to do, the method that I prefer is to just take your thermal paste and just go across, you know, try to cover as much as you can, and then spread that out. And you know, we can use this just to make life easier for ourselves. So basically you just go across and you spread that out as best as you can, and you try to cover as much of this as possible. And the reason that I prefer doing it this way is I have, absolute control. And here comes the mouser again, just to make sure everything's going correctly. But this way I have complete control, and I know for a fact that once I'm done applying this, it'll be everywhere. So, I'm just gonna fast forward until this is done. Okay, so there you go. That's all done. And I've never actually done it in my hand before, so that's a new experience for me. Get some paper here and just wipe that off. But yeah, as you can see, that has now been thoroughly coated. So when I put this over there, I know for a fact that I have complete coverage of that GPU. Another way that people like to do it, this is a new method. This is pretty much the old method. That's, it's what I was taught back in the day, and to me that's the one that works the best. Although the new method is basically to take a pea-sized amount, so about that much ish, and just plop it in the center. And don't do anything with it, but just take your, sink, and you can see how that squeezes out. And the idea is that once you apply the pressure with the cross beams, that is going to go all out and basically cover the whole thing. So if you remember, you had these that are made to apply pressure to those two, to the sandwich. But instead of that, I am just going to use these clamps here. So we'll take the one that I prepped here and just sandwich that. And you can see, there's pretty much coverage all over the place. I kind of put it off at an angle here, but still, you can see how that's covered all the way through. And then we'll take the other one here and do the same thing to this little bead here and apply the pressure. And you can see that there's a little bit coming out, but at the same time though, there's, it's still spreading slowly as the pressure is equalizing. But like the corners aren't getting any coverage at all. So that's one of the reasons I do not use this method myself. So if we open this up again, just to take a closer look, you can see here how that coverage is. And interestingly enough, it actually squeezed a little away from the side there. But you can see how it's coming out on the side here and also down here. So basically it's pushing the thermal paste out, but it's not doing too good of a job in the corners, and in fact it's pushing a lot of it out the sides. Whereas this guy, let's see here, now as I said, I put it off to the center here, but same thing happened here. There's a little, exactly where all the pressure was, there's a little opening. You can see it better from here. So interestingly enough, it actually seemed like now that the pressure's off, that's equalized. And you can see here as well, that's being equalized now that the pressure is off. But yeah, there's some air up here, but that's because this was put at an angle. So, I mean, both methods work, I guess. I've never actually done this test myself. I can see, it's getting more and more coverage here, but the corners are still not being covered. And, I just prefer this method myself, just to spread it out. It takes a little bit longer, but I know I have full coverage. There's no doubt in my mind. Whereas here, you know, a lot of it, like you can see here, has just been squirted out on the side instead of covering the actual corner over here. So that being said, I do prefer the spreading method. Now, another thing I should mention is when you look at videos for this, there are a lot of tutorials that tell you to take these and bend them. Because basically you can see that it's slightly angular, and that's because this bottom piece is supposed to be applying pressure. So that when you screw down the sides here, all the pressure is going to be put on this spot right here, and push the thermal paste. Personally, I would not advise that you bend these even more, because they are designed to give the optimal pressure. By bending it, all that you're doing is you're basically increasing the pressure on one spot. And as you could see from the test that I did, when you had a lot of pressure on one spot, you got that little divot where everything was pushed aside. So in fact, too much pressure is bad, because it'll disperse the thermal paste all the way away from your pressure point. So just have the correct amount of pressure the way that these are designed, and you should be good. So hopefully this was able to tell you a little bit about how thermal paste works, some pros and cons, and I would strongly suggest spreading it. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments. I think that I'm also going to change things up a little bit. I have my website, which currently is mostly documenting video games and so on, but I think I'll make a change to the forum. So I'll make a troubleshooting forum for consoles and the likes, where if you have any problems, I'll put a link in the description. You can join the forum, and you can post pictures of what your problems is or are, and I will get back to you and put photos, videos, and so on the forum, and basically help out any way that I can. So hopefully this was useful. If not, again, let me know so we can make a useful video. And I'll see you in the next one. So thank you so much.